Uh-oh.
What did you say?
Recording.
Yeah, so I'm putting it on record and I also have AI running next to it. So hopefully the meeting notes will be done as soon as this is over. Hey, Matt.
Hi, everyone.
So, Matt, have you used the AI companion on Zoom yet?
I haven't used it myself, but I work with some other towns with like volunteer committees and commissions that they use AI to do their minutes
Okay.
pretty much
I'm
entirely.
hoping
So
I'm hoping this is going to work. And someone from an iPhone 3 has just joined us.
yeah, I would just recommend like if you use AI companion, just to of course go through and read what it transcribes because sometimes there's some issues.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So Town of Weston, that's you, Lexi and Tom. Can you click on your video button?
We see, okay, hold on.
And there you are.
It's a minor miracle, a major miracle.
And Katie Fitzpatrick has joined us. Hi, Katie.
Hello.
Hi.
So we haven't started the meeting yet. So just make sure I gotta check my phone to make sure I've got my okay. Actually, Lexi, you ready to call the meeting?
Why don't we call the meeting to order? It's just about 6 o'clock, a couple minutes past, I guess. 6:02, and we've got a forum. So we've got 3 board members here. So let's start the meeting.
And just to remind everybody, we are recording as we're required to. So there you go.
Okay. Does anybody have any additions or changes to the agenda?
I have one, which is that I will not be discussing the application, the municipal planning grant this round. I will submit it subsequently to this for Matt, for you to review, and for everybody else. I have merged the document on those things, but I'm not far enough along to support spending time with it today.
Okay.
So that's, I think, agenda item 4 is off the agenda then.
Okay. So I've got my computer here, which I've got the stuff Matt sent to us. So I'm not seeing the agenda, Jeff. What's the next thing on there?
It's Matt at number 3.
Okay, that's what I figured.
Well, actually, no, I take that back. We had agenda minutes from our last meeting to approve. Do you want to postpone those to the next meeting? Or...
Yeah, why don't we do that?
Okay. All right, so we'll postpone the agenda items to the next meeting and let's go ahead and be on this one. Okay, Matt.
Okay, y'all all ready? Okay, sounds good. So hopefully you all had a chance to review the memo that I sent out last week. So this is really, we had a chance to meet back in May with Deb to go over the comments from the DRB about some of the priority technical fixes in the zoning updates that we're going to be working on. And then we did have the contract between WRC and the town approved by the select board, and that included those 7 priority areas that we discussed at the May meeting, just so we're all on the same page about what we're going to be working on with this project. And so the memo that I sent, and kind of my main goal for tonight, is to kind of just have like a baseline conversation. These are the 7 priority areas we're going to be working on. I haven't begun to make any revisions to the bylaws yet. I wanted to go over these to make sure Planning Commission understands them, and then there's some of these changes where it would be helpful to get some input from the Planning Commission before I start working on revisions. And then the idea would be to come back at your September meeting with a first draft of redlined edits, and then I'm imagining we'll have a couple meetings to fine tune the edits. And it's helpful to kind of give you all something to react to. So for the September meeting, don't feel as if that's the final version of this. So so I thought if it's
Would
okay
you
with
like
you,
me to, you want me to share the document? Is that easier?
yeah,
We-
if you have
We
it,
have it.
We have it,
Okay.
You
just
do?
so you know, yeah.
yeah, I
Okay.
have it in front of me. So if we're all okay, just kind of looking at
Yep.
it. So I was just going to go section by section.
Yeah.
And we can go over any questions. So the first thing we'll be looking at is adding a provision to the zoning bylaws to allow the town to permit uses that are not provided for in your zoning bylaws. So currently, section 200 of your bylaws states that if a use is not specifically listed as a permitted or conditional use, then it's prohibited. And so, yeah, the effect of this is that the town doesn't have a process for allowing a use that happens not to be listed in your zoning bylaws. Land uses change over time, so it's very hard to think of every possible land use when you're doing your zoning bylaws. And it would be very hard to list every land use that's possible in your bylaws. So many towns have a provision just to create a process for if a use is not listed in your zoning bylaws, allowing the town to approve that. And so typically that type of provision, it still prohibits a use if it's not listed unless certain criteria are met. So then there's a standard objective process that an applicant would need to go through to get a use approved. So it's very clear, kind of these are the conditions the town would allow a use that's not listed. And so in the memo, I provided just some examples of the, this is a common provision for towns to have. So these are just the most standard criteria that are used. So those include that the proposed use is materially similar to a use that's already listed in the zoning district. And as you know, you have permitted uses and uses that require conditional use approval. So in this evaluation, you would be comparing a proposed use to uses that are permitted and uses that are conditional. So it might be a use that's more similar to a conditional use, or it might be similar to a permitted use.
Matt froze, I think. Let's hold on a minute. Is it frozen on your end, Lexi?
Yes, yep.
All right. Let's see what happens. You should catch up. He may have to back out and come back in.
Does he know that he's frozen, do you think?
Yeah, at this point he would.
Okay.
Oh, he's gone. So he'll rejoin us. I just gotta get back to my participant list. He'll rejoin in a second. Well, while we're waiting, after reading through this first section, the key question that he's posing to us is going to be, would we want this? There he is. Hold on a minute. areas.
Sorry, I just lost internet for a minute.
You're back. We can hear you, just can't see you. You there?
So Jeff, I guess it seems to me like the question he's posing to us is how much liberty are we gonna grant the zoning administrator? Um,
That's the
you know,
question.
to make these kinds of determinations. And I like the proposal that says that if the zoning administrator feels like he needs some guidance, he can always take it to the DRB for help.
I would agree. I think from what I understand, at this point in time, this would be the type of it is still limited latitude as long as we have the similar bullet points and the fact that it has to be materially similar to something else, go down that list. And if those sets of criteria are met, I do think the zoning administrator should be able to make the call. And then next to that, it has the idea that if there is any lack of clarity or if it's unsure, then it would turn over to the DRB. So I think that's the type of stream that makes sense. And then obviously it does say if it's conditional, you have to go to the DRB no matter what.
We're gonna be
Tom?
revisiting this thing at least once or twice in the next 3
Yeah.
months.
Absolutely.
Yeah, but this allows him, because what he's going to do is model after other towns'
Yeah.
zoning code and the way the language is written. So this
Yeah.
was the first question that we actually had in the docket. So I think that makes perfect sense.
Yeah,
Okay. And he's back. Let's hope he stays.
it comes up on our screen with a highlighted admit, oh, disappeared.
No, he's here. I admitted him.
Okay.
Remember, I've got the controls here. So
Okay.
There
Matt,
it is.
you're back.
Sorry.
Okay.
I'm sorry about that. It's just,
Well, listen, while
Internet.
you were
yeah.
a glitch, while you were disappeared, what we did agree upon is that we think the zoning administrator should be actually able to make that limited call with DRB
Mhm.
guidance, should it be unclear, so forth and so on, because that was
Okay.
really the question that you were asking out of
Yep.
this section, correct?
Yep. Yeah.
Okay.
So that was the main one of the inputs from the planning commission is whether the ZA should have the option to approve it, and then of course they can always go to the DBA if it's not clear. So
Exactly.
okay, great.
So Matt, I have a question. So I can't even think of an illustration here to use as an example, but let's say someone makes an application and the ZA determines that he's going to make the call and permit it.
Yeah.
Is there notice that has to be given to abutters, or how does that work?
Yeah, well, I think if if the ZA was approving a use, they would also have to be issuing a zoning permit along with that, and then there is the appeal process.
Right.
Yeah,
Okay.
for that.
So that has the self-correction in there so that the disgruntled neighbor gets to voice their opposition if they feel that's appropriate.
Yeah, and I think towns do it differently. I know of one example where like the ZA is required to notify the DRB when they approve a use that's not listed. So they're keeping the DRB in the loop.
And
So that's
I actually
yeah.
think that's not a bad idea.
Yeah.
Only because, again, this would be new to the town. I think there should be an automatic feedback loop through I believe through the DRB, because that way they're understanding what's being approved by
Yeah.
the zoning administrator. And
Yeah.
and as long as Lexi said, there's a self-correction mechanism, I think it all works.
Yeah, and I think if the ZA did something that the DRB disagreed with, I think there's a process to
Yeah.
override that.
And Matt, is there some statutory requirement on how long of an appeal period there is? One town that I work with, it's just customary for the for the zoning administrator. They always have 30 days and they don't issue an opinion until the 30th day routinely.
Yeah.
So, I mean, if we could narrow that up to 14 days or something, or is it a statutory requirement on 30?
Well, it's the ZA, it's right. The ZA has 30 days, right, to make a decision on an application. Is that
That's
what
in
you're-
one
yeah.
of the towns
Yeah.
that I'm working with, yeah.
Yeah, I think I would have to look into that. That is, I know that's in statute, that 30-day limit. I'm not sure if towns can have a tighter schedule than 30 days. I would imagine so. But it is, I understand 30 days feels like a long time, but I also know it can be helpful for ZAs to have a little cushion.
Well, especially
So-
our ZA has what, 5 towns that he's responsible for, so that
Yeah.
I would encourage to stay with a longer period. I'd be
Yeah.
tough to ask someone to turn around that quickly.
Yeah. Okay. Sorry, let me just get reoriented.
Waivers.
So that was the main question I had for the first item. And like I said, the criteria are pretty standard across town. So I think it's going to be easier for me to give you some things to consider in September for criteria, and then we can kind of fine tune it from there rather than trying to come up with kind of wordsmith the criteria tonight.
Yep.
Yeah. Okay. And then just with this one final thing. So for your zoning bylaws, you require a site plan review application with the DRB for anything other than a 1-family or 2-family home. So even if the ZA approves a use that's a permitted use, they're likely still going to need a site plan approval from the DRB. And then that's another way for the DRB to see, oh, the ZA said this is an okay use. So that's another kind of public process they would have to go through.
Okay.
The second item is regarding waivers. So right now, if a property owner is looking for flexibility from the underlying zoning bylaw requirements, the only process they have is the variance process. And as you probably know, the variance process is very challenging. It's hard to get a variance approval. There are criteria and statute that I listed out in the memo for that the town needs to find that all those criteria are met to issue a variance. And just across the board, it tends to be hard for applicants to receive a variance. And so in light of that, there were changes made to statute several years ago to allow towns to grant a waiver, which is similar to a variance. Again, it's giving flexibility from the usual zoning requirements, but the waiver is just for flexibility from dimensional standards. So if someone's looking to do an addition on their home and it has to be 2 extra feet into the setback requirement. If you have like a 10-foot setback requirement and you really need, like, the addition would go to 8 feet, that's a waiver from a dimensional requirement. Or it could be something regarding building height, but it's not, you can't grant a waiver for a use that's not allowed in a district. So you can't give a waiver for industrial use in a residential district, for example. It's just dimensional standards. And it's the town can determine the criteria for granting the waiver. So it allows the town to have criteria that are less strict than the variance criteria. And this is also, it's a very common provision for towns to have in their bylaws. So I provided some examples from other towns in our region that do allow for waivers. So Those include, the request, or a reasonable use of the property is only possible if the waiver is granted. The waiver is the minimum reduction in dimensional requirements, so, I would not encourage the town to grant excessive waivers, so it's really if someone's just doing kind of the minimum they need to complete a project. It still conforms with the town plan and with the underlying intent of the zoning district, so you're still in line with the purpose of the zoning district. It wouldn't have negative impacts on surrounding properties. And then also the need for the waiver wasn't created by the property owner. So again, I'll come back with proposed criteria for the September meeting. One question I wanted to ask the planning commission about is some towns will set a limit on how much of a waiver can be granted. So there are examples of, the town cannot grant a waiver that would decrease the dimensional requirement more than 50%. So like if you had a setback requirement of 10 feet, you could only grant a waiver for a building to go 5 feet within that setback. My personal opinion is I think having just good criteria is sufficient, because if you set a limit of 20% or 50%, there might be a scenario where that is a real hurdle and then they have to get a variance. And so I think just having good criteria is enough, rather than setting a percentage limit, but I wanted to get your thoughts on that.
I
My
personally
thought
would
is that
agree.
we follow your advice.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, Matt, I think if we're gonna go down the road of a waiver, again, I think to start putting these additional artificial limits on it is kind of crazy.
Yeah.
Because each situation hopefully will be taken unto itself to say, does that make sense? And to your point, your other criteria makes more sense. So
Yeah. Okay. And then the next section is on the off-street loading requirements. So right now, the zoning bylaws include a requirement that commercial uses provide at least one off-street loading space measuring 12 feet by 40 feet with at least 14 feet high of clearance. So the DRB has noted that this is especially hard in the village, just because the properties are small. It's hard to accommodate that loading area. You also have a lot of small businesses that probably have pretty minimal needs for loading and receiving, and might be able to do that with just a truck pulling off on the side of the road, rather than having a dedicated space on the property. So my recommendation is just to remove that specific dimensional standard for off-street loading, but still include a provision that commercial uses need to provide for adequate loading areas. Because your zoning requires a site plan review application for all commercial uses and multifamily uses. So the DRB would already have that opportunity to look at a plan for a property and determine if there's adequate loading. So then it allows the DRB to make that more on a case-by-case basis rather than just a blanket, this is required for everyone. So that's my recommendation.
Like it.
and if I think about it, I'm thinking about what is it, the left bank, and don't they load directly off the street, Lexi, into the restaurant there?
I'm not sure.
Yeah, they do.
Yeah.
They go right into
Yeah,
the
so-
kitchen.
Yeah.
I mean, the reality is it's a small town and we want business, so
Right.
why would we want to restrict it based upon that? And the site plan review does all that, so I think that's very
Yeah.
appropriate.
Yeah.
Okay,
And then for landscaping and screening, so there are several sections in the zoning bylaws that address landscaping and screening between a commercial use and a residential use. And typically zoning bylaws will have those provisions because you want to reduce negative impacts of a commercial property right next to a residential property. You're trying to kind of insulate that residential property. The DRB has noted that some of the requirements in the zoning are pretty extensive for screening and landscaping, and that similarly, this is hard in the village district because you have smaller properties and you have that mix of residential and commercial properties throughout the village. So there's a lot of cases where you have commercial and residential right next to each other. And in particular, section 570 has the requirement of maintaining a strip of land at least 25 feet in width as a landscaped area in the front, side, and rear yards between commercial and residential uses. And so if you think about the village district where the properties are very small, 25 feet is a lot of land to just dedicate for landscaping. And a lot of properties don't have that space. And then there's some other requirements too in section 571 about providing a solid fence or evergreen landscaping at least 5 feet in height between commercial and residential uses. And then there's also some screening requirements for parking in non-residential districts or uses between that property and a residential property. So my sense from just our meeting in May with Deb was that the town would like to kind of do like a comprehensive review of these different screening and landscaping requirements and figure out. I don't have an answer tonight for how we solve that, but I think it's trying to do more of a comprehensive review of that, making sure that they are not, in conflict or contradictory, and to come up with a solution that is more suitable for the village than what's currently in there. So it's not saying we would do away with screening entirely, but maybe there's different provisions in the village versus the rest of the town. Again, because commercial properties have to go through the site plan review process, there is an opportunity for the DRB to look at screening on a case-by-case basis. It's probably not a bad idea to have some minimum standards in there for screening. But again, there's that process for a site plan review to take a look at this too. So this is one where I just need more time to kind of work on this section, but that's my understanding of the town's concerns. Is that accurate based on your conversations with Deb?
That's very accurate. So
Okay. Yeah.
I'm not really sure where you're going to go with it. It is definitely accurate. And
Yeah.
if you just think about the village, and again, we want to see increased use and the rest of it, and there's some very tight quarters. So
Yeah.
as long as, and what you're saying is though, you can have one landscape screening buffer concept village and then one for everything else. And I think
Yeah.
that's what is being asked.
Yeah. Yeah, I think that's probably the direction I'll go in. Okay. I'm just jotting some notes down. Okay, so the next section is minor subdivisions. So Weston you have separate subdivision regulations that are separate from your zoning bylaws. And currently your zoning bylaws address subdivisions in section 590. And so it says for a minor subdivision, which the town defines as a subdivision that doesn't create more than 2 lots. So it's really just if you're taking a piece of land and dividing it into two properties, that's a minor subdivision. If you're creating more than two lots, so 3 or more lots, then that's a major subdivision. So the minor subdivisions, they go to the DRB for review to make sure it's conforming with the lot area requirements. Yeah, but the major subdivision requires the going through the whole subdivision regulation review process. And that it requires more of a property owner in terms of infrastructure requirements, possibly, and how the properties are laid out. It's a more expensive process too for hiring a surveyor to do the full major subdivision process versus just a minor subdivision. And when we met in May, we had talked about looking at, the minor subdivision provisions and whether the town would want to increase the number of lots that would count as a minor subdivision. So the planning commission could consider if we want to increase it from more than 2 lots. Typically, towns don't go more than 4 lots for a minor subdivision. So it's usually, I think 3 is most common for a minor subdivision. Some towns do 4. But if it's 5 or more, most towns do that as a major subdivision, which I think that makes sense. I think for Weston, I think starting off with 3 lots as a minor subdivision would make sense. I think, and the planning commission can also consider whether they want to allow the zoning administrator to approve minor subdivisions. So statute does allow towns to give that authority to the zoning administrator versus it going to the DRB. So those are the 2 questions to consider. And we don't need an answer tonight, I guess, for the number of lots, but whether we want to increase the number of lots that qualify as a minor subdivision from more than 2, and whether the ZA should be able to approve a minor subdivision.
I mean, honestly, land is very, I would say I could see going to 3 to avoid the larger planning major subdivision process, but I think it should remain DRB review.
Yep.
And not be a
Yeah.
ZA. That to me is, I don't know, if I were our zoning administrator, I think I'd want the DRB to make that call. So that's where my head would land.
Yeah, I think that
What
would
do you
be my
guys think?
recommendation for Weston.
Lex?
I missed the question. Do we have a recommendation?
Oh, so the question was whether you would want to give the zoning administrator the authority to approve a minor subdivision.
Yes. So
versus-
Tom and I mean, I guess I kind of disagree with Jeff a little bit. So, I mean, and maybe it could be splitting the baby a little bit. So if someone wanted to do a single subdivision, create 2 lots, and those lots were all, you weren't asking for waivers on anything, and they were otherwise conforming with the regs, I would probably say that I would think the zoning administrator ought to be able to do that. And maybe having a subdivision of more than 2 going to 3 or 4 would require DRB approval.
Yeah, I think it's just a question of number, whether it's 2 or 3.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I'm comfortable with 3 if that's what's customary in the state.
I'm comfortable with 3 too. I'm just, I'm almost thinking you go to 3, maybe as stage 1 to this, and then maybe you add the ZA approving it at a later date just to see what comes out of it. I don't know. It feels, I I guess I'm in disagreement. I still think it should be a DRB function, but that's my opinion.
Yeah, and this is something too, we can put a
Oh,
pin in it.
yes.
So, yeah.
We're gonna get a lot of input
Yeah.
from select
Right.
board and everybody else, no matter what
Right.
we do,
Yeah.
and we'll,
Yeah.
I suspect, just like in the town plan, if someone's got a really strong opinion about something, we're,
Listen.
we're somewhat deferential and we'll at least listen.
Yeah, and I think, yeah, the language in the bylaws, whether it's a DRB or a zoning administrator approval for the minor subdivision, it's not a significant difference in the
Right.
wording. So it's something we can kind of make a note that that's something we're still considering, and then kind of finalize it later on.
And Matt, was I gleaning from what you said that if someone is just doing turning one lot into two lots, that does not require them to get a survey, but a major subdivision does include a survey requirement?
Well, they would still need a survey to do the 2-lot subdivision. It's just with the major subdivision application, there's often more requirements
Yeah.
as part of the land survey process.
Okay, good, because I think
yeah.
getting a requirement from us for a survey is pretty reasonable.
Yeah, you definitely want to. Yeah, you
Okay.
want to have a survey
Yep.
just for land record purposes. So,
Yeah, no,
for sure.
exactly.
Yeah. But yeah, my main point was the minor subdivision process just can be a cost savings because it's a little less work for the surveyor than the major subdivision. So, okay. For building height, so currently, I provided the definition
Yep.
in your zoning bylaws here. So vertical distance from the lowest elevation at finished grade to the elevation of the highest point of the roof on the building. And so townwide, your maximum building height is 35 feet. So I know this is an area of concern. I guess coming out of the meeting we had in May, it was unclear to me kind of what direction the town would want to go in with this.
I think this is fraught with problems.
Yeah.
So much can happen with the building height definition. And I would, if you have access to language from other towns,
Mhm.
because we have different kinds of architecture, you have mansard, you have this, you have that, and you really have to be careful, otherwise it can bite you in the back.
Yep. And are just from your knowledge, are there examples of instances where the building height definition has caused issues in town in Weston?
Yeah,
Oh,
just
yeah.
very.
Okay.
Big time where I
Yeah.
came from, big time.
Yeah.
Well,
Big time.
and in Weston, there
Yeah.
was a controversy just within the last year.
Okay.
And Lexi, just to, if I'm not mistaken, it really came down into this notion of where they were measuring from around the foundation to the height of the
That's
building.
Yep.
Yeah, so I do think this one needs to be cleaned up, and
Yeah.
that there are, a reasonability standard, so to speak, has to lay into this. And it's this notion of averages.
Yeah.
And where do you call, because
Yeah, that's
landscape
hard.
can change. And
Yeah. You have a flat top building.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Uh,
Yeah, because it's pretty, it's different for towns. Some towns have the same definition as Weston. Some towns will just take, if you have a pitched roof, the average, so from the like the average between the eaves and the top of the roof line. Some towns will do, if a building is built into a hillside, they'll do the average grade between kind of the walkout level and the
Yep.
street level. So, and to your point, it's I think cleaning it up, making it clear how you take that measurement. But to your point, from my experience as a zoning administrator in the past, it's one of the dimensional requirements that is the trickiest, kind of no matter how you define it. So, but I think just cleaning it up and coming up with a definition that the town is more comfortable with.
Yep.
Okay.
Good.
Okay. And then the last section, the last area we would be looking at is the town wants to include a process for amending zoning bylaws, or excuse me, amending zoning permits that have been approved and site plans that have been approved. So, so you could grant authority to the zoning administrator in the bylaws to approve amendments to the zoning permit, and also approve amendments to site plans that have been approved by the DRB, as long as the changes conform to the regulations and are not materially different from what the DRB has approved. So that could be, I'm just trying to think of an example. You know, that could be if someone was proposing a commercial development, they've provided all the necessary parking, and in the construction process, they need to slightly adjust the location of some parking spaces, and they're still providing all the parking. It really has no material change to the plan. That's kind of an example where it's not a material change, like it's not something that would have really like come up in the public review process as an area of concern. So you could add a provision that allows the ZA to do that. Again, like similar to the uses not provided for, still have something in there that if the ZA is unsure, that they can send it up to the DRB for review. That provision would also, like if it is a material change to a site plan review application, like if someone's doing a commercial building and it's, you know, they're proposing a change to the landscaping between their property and the residential property, or the building is going to be located 10 feet closer to a property line, that would be a more material change that should be reviewed by the DRB. And so there would still be that provision in there that a material change has to go back to the DRB. I think it's helpful if you include that provision, that it's just clear that if someone is coming to the DRB for a change to the site plan, that the DRB is just, their review is just on that change. So it's not reopening the whole application, and you don't want it to be that if there's, you know, public concern about a project, the DRB approves it, they have to come back for a minor change, then all of a sudden all these new conditions get put on them. You want to make sure that it's a limited review, and then that just makes the DRB's job easier too, that they know I'm just looking at this one change in considering that. So yeah, so my recommendation is to include that provision that allows the zoning administrator to make those approvals as long as they're not materially different, and then just defining the process for the DRB to approve changes to the site plan. I know it's an extra step for a property owner, but I do think it's important that kind of more significant changes go back to the DRB, and it's a hard position for a zoning administrator to be put in to approve something that is more significant change.
So in many ways, this is I'm feeling there's a lot of, how do I say this? It's similar in the same type of treatment of waiver.
Yep.
The ZA will have a certain level of authority if it meets these core conditions, and then it goes to the DRB based upon X, Y, or Z. And having myself dealt with this for VCS, I do think this is an important tool that's needed in their toolbox.
Yeah.
So I think the making it consistent and parallel kind of
Yeah.
with amendments, I think is the right thing to do.
Yeah, it would have kind of, yeah, it would have a similar framework to the uses not provided for. So.
Right.
I think that sounds smart.
Okay. Okay. So those were the 7 areas we identified. So thank you for your feedback on those items. So for me, next steps are to draft redlined edits for the September meeting. And some of these sections will be probably more close to complete. I mean, I'll have redline edits for everything, but there's some sections where we're gonna want to have more discussion at the September meeting than others. And then based on feedback at the September meeting, then come back at the October meeting with an updated version of the changes. One question I can follow up with Shauna is I'm still looking for a Word document version of the zoning bylaws. I only have them as a PDF. So,
I can get that to you.
Okay.
I think I have a clean copy.
okay.
I will do that right after this.
Okay. Thanks. I think that's all I had. I don't know if there's anything any questions you have or
No, it covered everything in the memo and what we were looking to do. So
Yeah.
appreciate it.
yeah.
Lexi, I would have to share the minute in the last meeting since it was so brief. It will take you
Yep.
2 seconds for you to approve it. And then that way that is done as part of this meeting. And then Matt, I will, as I said in an email I sent to you guys, I've done my merge. I started working through the
Mhm.
the MPG grant process.
Mhm.
And so it's more time consuming than I thought it was going to be. So my hope is by
Yeah.
mid of this month, not mid, a little bit later, I'll have something which will really go out as a draft. And then you can advise us on what I'm missing, what you should consider and go from there.
Okay.
All right.
That sounds good. Yeah, we're still waiting on the grant announcement from the state.
Okay.
But
How
I'm
much
expecting
time do
that
we
to be
usually, how much time will we have once that's announced?
well, usually they announce it mid-July or late July, and then usually the application window opens September 1st, and the submittal is November 1st, roughly.
Okay, so we
Yeah.
got plenty of time.
We
Great.
got plenty of
Okay.
time. Yeah.
All right. I'm going to share the PC minutes from the last meeting. If you guys can close it on the screen, you'll see it. And that's basically it. It was a short set of meetings.
Yeah.
Okay. Want to make a motion to approve, Lexi, or?
Sure. I make a motion that we approve the minutes that from last meeting.
I second.
All in favor?
All right, passed.
Okay. All right. So okay. So Matt, thank you very much. And I may turn to you on this AI thing if I don't get it right, because I'm hoping I'm going to be able to have these great minutes coming out of this.
Yeah, hopefully it
and-
works out.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So we're still recording. Anything else in the last minute? Katie, as a guest, did you have anything that you wanted to cover with us? And you're muted if you are talking.
You like,
Excuse me? You good?
hi. Yeah, no, I have nothing to say. I'm just here as like a learning person.
Okay, great. Well, thank you for joining us. All right.
Thank you so much.
if
This
all-
has been really informative. Thank you.
Okay. You ready to close the meeting, Lexi?
Yep, I make a motion.
Second.
Second. Okay.
Hey, thanks,
We're
Matt.
adjourned.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you, Matt, so
We'll
much.
see you.
And
See you in September, if not before.
okay, and I gotta stop recording wherever that is. All right, I gotta
Okay.
close this whole thing out now.
Good night, guys. Thank you.
Good night.
Good night.
How do I shut this over off?
All right, all right, stop